I think I previously left you with this story where the stage 3 grievance had not been upheld by Professor Bill Steveley at NHS Ayrshire. I wasn't happy about this, so I decided to pursue NHS Ayrshire to find out what had happened in all the other previous critical incident reports, or serious adverse event reports as they became known, during that period between 2005 and 2010. I asked Ayrshire to provide me with copies, redacted copies of these reports, because redacted copies of reports were what should have been given, though they never were what should have been given to people directly involved in critical incidents. It says in the critical incident policy at NHS Ayrshire, or it did at that time, that an anonymised copy of the report will be given to every member of staff who was directly involved in the event. We know now that that never ever happened. So I asked for copies of these reports. The reports should have been redacted and then disseminated to people. Copies of these should be sitting in an office somewhere on a shelf, all redacted, so that anybody could read these reports. But they refused to give me these reports and the action plans pertaining to them. I couldn't understand this. Why should I not be allowed to see, well, at least the action plans? The action plan is just a tick box of what to do in the event of a certain event occurring, and how to manage it, how to deal with it. But no, they wouldn't give me these. And I received an email in March the 2nd, 2011. This came from a Penny French, who was a director of communications or something at NHS Ayrshire. I don't think she works there anymore. And it came via Rab Wilson, who was the Freedom of Information Officer. And it said, "We do not hold any action plans, with exception of the critical incident report you had previously requested from us." Now that's an extraordinary statement there. An extraordinary statement. NHS Ayrshire hold no action plans for that period from 2005 to 2010. Well, what the hell were they doing? These incidents are meant to be, organisational learning is meant to take place in the organisation, so as that these kind of similar events don't happen again. So basically they were telling me that these things didn't exist. Crazy. So I then took my request to the Scottish Freedom of Information Commissioner, Mr. Kevin Dunnian, and I put in an official Freedom of Information request, requesting copies of these reports for that 5 years and the action plans. Curiously, round about this time that I was asking these very probing and very searching questions of the organisation, a new critical incident policy was put into place. And you would think that this policy would be an improvement on the previous one and be a much more open and transparent and honest way of dealing with these reports, so that people could get access to them. Now, I've already told you what the previous policy said. It said an anonymised copy of the report will be given to every member of staff directly involved in an incident. So how did Ayrshire improve upon that statement in the new policy? The new policy, which came into place in January 2011, stated, "No one will be given a copy of a report unless it is by the express authority of the Executive Medical Director, Bob Masterton, or the Executive Nurse Director, Fiona McQueen." I believe that this was an attempt at yet another cover-up in order to prevent people getting to getting hold of information that by rights they should have been given. This is something, a serious thing that really needs to be looked at. Why this policy was redrafted, recreated, that made things even less transparent, even less honest. What was going on here? At that same time, Kevin Dunnian and his team, the Scottish Freedom of Information Commissioner, whose people were absolutely brilliant. These people virtually, saved my reputation and saved my career. At that time, he was due to produce his decision notice on this. And on the 21st of February 2012, that decision notice was published. And it's quite an incredible document, I suppose even a landmark document in the annals of the Scottish Freedom of Information Commissioner's office. It is a totally damning indictment of NHS Ayrshire and their management of critical incident reports. In the decision summary, which is worth quoting at length, and these documents can be found online. I would encourage anybody who's interested in this to track down these documents and read them, because it's really, really important what is being said here about critical incident reports and their management and how NHS boards actually deal with these sort of incidents. Kevin Dunnian, Scottish Freedom of Information Commissioner, re Rab Wilson and NHS Ayrshire. Decision summary. Rab Wilson asked Ayrshire NHS Board for copies of all critical incident reviews and significant adverse event reports carried out by NHS Ayrshire since January 2005, and for the action plans derived from the reports. NHS Ayrshire refused to disclose the critical incident reports to Mr Wilson on the basis that they were in their entirety exempt from disclosure. NHS Ayrshire advised Mr Wilson that it did not hold any critical incident report action plans, with the exception of one plan, my original one, which I had already been given after a 3-year battle. NHS Ayrshire also refused to provide copies of the critical incident report action plans, as they were to be published within 12 weeks, and NHS Ayrshire considered that they were exempt from disclosure. Following a review, Mr Wilson remained dissatisfied and applied to the Commissioner for a decision. Following an investigation, the Commissioner ordered NHS Ayrshire to provide anonymised versions of the critical incident reports to Mr Wilson, a thing that I had been asking for years. Although some of the contents of the reports were exempt from disclosure, for example because they contained sensitive personal data, and I'm absolutely fine with that, that is the way it should be, the Commissioner concluded that it was possible to redact the reports in such a way that the patients, etc., could not be identified. Failure to provide redacted copy of the reports was a breach of the Freedom of Information Scotland Act. During the investigation, NHS Ayrshire located a large number of CIR action plans falling within the scope of Mr Wilson's request. As we heard earlier, an earlier email from NHS Ayrshire's Director of Communications told me that they held no action plans whatsoever. And yet, here mysteriously, all the action plans suddenly turned up. As a consequence, the Commissioner found that NHS Ayrshire had been wrong to advise Mr Wilson that it did not hold any such plans. He also found that the exemption in section 27.1 did not apply to the serious adverse event reports or critical incident reports action plans. While learning summaries of the plans were published by NHS Ayrshire during the investigation, the Commissioner was not satisfied that it had intended to publish the plans when Mr Wilson made his information request. In any event, the learning summaries which had been published did not contain the same information as the action plans. The Commissioner therefore ordered NHS Ayrshire to provide Mr Wilson with anonymised versions of the critical incident reports and the serious adverse event report action plans. In the decision, the Commissioner also expresses significant concerns about the handling of Mr Wilson's request and about NHS Ayrshire records management practices in relation to critical incident reports and serious adverse event reports and their action plans. A quote from Kevin Dunnian, the Commissioner. This case has involved a catalogue of failings by the Board to search for and find information falling within the scope of Mr Wilson's request. Perhaps the most serious such case by an authority in my time as a Commissioner. Claims made to Mr Wilson turned out to be wrong, and prior assurances given to me and my staff turned out to be unjustified. At the very least, this constitutes a significant failure of records management, but given the nature of the information which was the subject of the request, the failings may point to wider governance issues which have to be addressed. Mr Wilson's persistence was characterised by the Board as being vexatious, but perhaps instead should have raised concerns that records concerning critical incidents which should have been held were missing. Policies regarding action plans were not being adhered to, and public confidence that plans had been drawn up and acted upon could be affected. Certainly, I found it so difficult to believe that such documents could be unaccounted for in terms of whether they had been created, acted upon or destroyed that it caused me to continue with my investigation despite the Board's protestations. As this is my last decision, I will recommend to the new Commissioner who takes up post on the 1st of May 2012 that consideration is given to carrying out an assessment of NHS Ayrshire freedom of information practices. He goes on to say, in some key points of his decision, in conclusion, this decision involves perhaps the most serious catalogue of failings to search for and find information within the scope of a request that the Commissioner has ever had to deal with. As I say, you can find this summary and the decision notice online, and it's well worth reading if you're interested in these sort of matters. Following on from the bombshell of the publication of the Freedom of Information Commissioner's decision notice, even though I had been a voice in the wilderness for several years, and I had been writing to MPs, and I had been writing to Nicola Sturgeon, the then Health Secretary in the Scottish Government, I don't think prior to Kevin Dunnian's decision notice that people were really taking me serious. But this, on its publication on the 21st of February 2012, was national headlines. These were national headlines. And it was a huge weight off my shoulders and that of my family. My wife and my daughter had to carry this burden for years as well. It's been a very, very difficult time for us. I was speaking the truth all along, and yet this organisation moved heaven and earth to prevent information that should have been in the public domain being released. I was then invited up to a meeting at Holyrood with Nicola Sturgeon to discuss what should happen next with NHS Ayrshire.